Your glorious fury will be mine.
Greetings and citations, everyone. As time has gone on, with our encounters and voyages between worlds and continents, a question has often lingered in the back of my head regarding our favorite Naifu relic, Xal'atath. What exactly is she? A forgotten old god? A piece of one? A dark Naru? A void god of some sort? Well, obviously, I don't have any concrete answers at this exact time, but I do believe I can at least narrow what she isn't and go from there. Spoilers ahead, like always. A quick start of what we know of Xal'atath thus far, with the information provided, is that Xal'atath is a very ancient entity that was at least present for the destruction of Karesh, the homeworld of the Ethereals, and was even known by Locus-Walker, the current teacher and mentor for Illyria, in mastering the Void without going mad. The destruction of the Ethereals' homeworld was also many thousands of years ago, and that she served under the Void Lord Dementius, responsible for its destruction, even wielding a powerful staff known as the Void Song, gifted to her by her master during the height of the Black Empire for an unspecified purpose. Notably, the Void Song is a weapon for the size of a mortal, but perhaps it changes size for its user, or was intended to be that size for a prophetic purpose. At some point, she was betrayed by the other old gods and sealed inside what we now know as the Blade of the Black Empire, and in spite of her current containment, she remained ever active and influenced the minds of trolls, humans, dwarves, and the other races on Azeroth throughout the ages, being a very key player in the rise, downfall, and corruption of kingdoms, religions, and all sorts of other integral pillars that would shape the history for Azeroth, eventually falling into the hands of a powerful priest who would wield her for good to best the Burning Legion's return to Azeroth. In the end of the conflict against the Burning Crusade, she was ultimately used to help contain the powers of the Dark Titan's sword within Xal'atath, sending her into a temporary sleep-like state to then disappear, falling once more in the hands of the corrupt. This time with the Naga, whom planned to scour Azeroth in a powerful storm, something that would seemingly be thwarted by acquiring their artifacts. Along the way, a high elven body was taken over by Xal'atath after she was killed, noting it had been some time since she had a mortal body before this one, thus implying she's possessed mortal bodies before while still trapped within the dagger. The elven body we see her in now is not her original body. She's then set free by N'Zoth, the last remaining and active old god on Azeroth, to do so long as the blade served his will. She leaves through a void tear, noting that we will meet her again, as is typical of Warcraft villains. Notably, the blade is the only thing that can weaken N'Zoth, who was and is aware that it'll be used against him in a ploy by both Ajara and Sylvanas later. The blade is never used by Ajara to kill N'Zoth, but instead by Arathian, who uses it to tear into a weak point of N'Zoth's body within Nya'lotha. The blade also disappeared upon being used and is never seen again, at least for now. Potentially still to be used by N'Zoth for his own purposes, or is returned to the Void or another fate all entirely. Either way, the Blade of the Black Empire is gone, but held the ability to weaken or imprison powerful Void creatures. Recently, Xal'atath has returned and formed an alliance with Iridikron, a recently freed, powerful earthen proto-dragon with a vendetta against the Titans. This union allowed Iridikron to acquire a relic known as the Dark Heart, and drain the essence of Galakrond from the past to be used within the present by Xal'atath for her own schemes, testing Illyria with images of her past on Argus and exposing her own army of ethereal at the gates of Ulduar, and again within the rift that the Void Elves called home. Xal'atath has quite notably taken a steep interest in Illyria and the other larger champions of Azeroth, but Illyria most of all, since her Void transformation back on Argus. Likely readying her next host, or perhaps her next successor. With a dark heart in hand, Xal'atath rouses an army of Darubians underground and is harvesting the blood of her now fellow old gods who have gone into dormancy since their defeats. Moving to acquire what the other old gods failed to acquire, the world soul of Azeroth. Now then, what context clues can we shape out of all that's been given? Well, for starters, we now know that she's not an old god, despite her relationship with them and the many similarities, this being confirmed by Illyria while underground, stating that she is instead something more that was lost to time. For a while I did believe that she was also an old god, but it would seem that is not the case. I also believe this means she is not a Dark Naru either, even if she calls them her kin. She also refers to the old god as her brothers and kin just as well, which narrows things down quite a bit further. And if she is subservient to Dimensius, I also believe this means that she is not a Void Lord. Obviously, she is an ancient void creature of some kind that I do believe predates even the old gods, or at least Azeroth's old gods. With how much she goes from world to world, Koresh to Azeroth, and perhaps beyond. So, considering how ingrained the old gods get when they land on a planet, I do not believe that Xal'atath is an old god with that in mind. So my ultimate guess is if she's not an old god, a Dark Naru, or a Void Lord, that she may very well have been a mortal of some kind, much like Illyria herself was. Or I guess rather is. And not just that, but I think she was the mortal, the first mortal, to answer the Void's call, possibly. This would make her a dark reflection of what Illyria could become if she allows herself to be consumed by the whispers of the Void. Similar to also Locus-Walker, who is another mortal who has mastered the Void, so it's not out of line that mortals could rival such powers and scope, especially when we've seen what happens when Garrosh consumes the heart of Y'Shaarj, or when Illyria consumed a Dark Naru. Xal'atath could have done the same, or have been boosted by Dimensius for her loyalty to him. As an addendum to Locus-Walker, I could also see possibly that Xal'atath was maybe Locus-Walker's first apprentice, or vice versa, Locus-Walker was Xal'atath's first apprentice. Very interesting dynamic either way. This would explain her own obsession of mortals and her staff being intended for one. She's obviously no longer in her original physical body anymore, either consumed by time, old gods, or something else entirely. And given that N'Zoth went AWOL against the Void Lords for his own schemes and plans, it's very possible that other old gods also agreed with N'Zoth and turned on Xal'atath, noting of her own loyalty to Dimensius, who would seemingly prefer to just devour Azeroth than corrupt her, it seems. Going by what happens with Koresh, although things might have just gone horribly with Koresh in general, and that's why we never really saw a void entity birth from Koresh's downfall. Or that did happen and it's just never detailed. Either way. It's important to note that they also didn't kill Xal'atath either, and N'Zoth didn't overreact when she visited him, when she entered his chambers. So maybe they couldn't kill her, or knew killing her would have only resulted in her return to the Void to tell their masters or their former masters of their betrayal. Or perhaps the old gods and Xal'atath had the same goals but disagreed on how to do it. Old gods do tend to fight each other, and they're all sort of rivals, so it's not out of the question for the Void to encourage that sort of chaos. Void Lords also struggle with manifesting in general, so it's not as if they could have done much if their rogue old gods did defy them. The Dimensius we've come to know in Outland himself was just a fragment, and seemed quite weaker than the old gods that we have come to know. N'Zoth is also the most intelligent of his siblings, rivaled maybe only by Yogg-saron, and maybe knew what was fated due to some serious history hopping by us. He also warns us he alone could stop what was to come, which, while was super vague, could have implied his own defiance of the Void Lords and Xal'atath maybe. Of course, that comes in the question of why he freed Xal'atath in the first place, but oh well. Or maybe he did not view Xal'atath as a threat at the time of freeing her, as the way he speaks to her definitely doesn't invoke him viewing her as his boss. But then again, he holds all the cards here, and it's not as if Xal'atath was in a very powerful state here. Either way, the old gods did betray Xal'atath for one reason or another, and she somehow ended up inside the Blade of the Black Empire, which only an old god could seemingly remove her from. Alternatively, Xal'atath could also have been an early creation of the old gods, or meant to be something like their shepherd or their leader, as the old gods did war and conflict with one another when the Titans hadn't arrived just yet, and Y'Shaarj was winning this conflict and he was the strongest. So perhaps Y'Shaarj, who was rumored to be Xal'atath's original body, consumed her the most, and thus became stronger from it. And by killing her, or consuming her in this case, they no longer had any sort of entity to answer to and could be their own boss, resulting in that chaos that would follow them warring with one another, and then with the Titans, and them then being sealed up in their own prisons. Right now, of course, we just don't have all the answers on what Xal'atath is, but I at least hoped I helped in clearing up some things that we do know. We at least know she isn't an old god, and I also just think with how Illyria phrased it, she's not anything we've come to know either. But I'm hoping we'll get more information on what she is and her origins in the upcoming future. I'm quite curious to see what Xal'atath's full-on plan to take Azeroth might be, and if it involves possessing either Illyria or maybe even Azeroth herself to do so. Part of me does hope Xal'atath is grander than Dimensius's whole having the munchies and instead wants to become her own boss, or her own Void Lord maybe. But as always, we'll just have to see for ourselves. Thank you all for watching, and let me know your own thoughts on what you think Xal'atath is. Do you think she's the first mortal to answer the void? An early concept of the old gods? Something else? Let me know down below. But with all that being said, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and all that jazz. You can also join me on my Discord where we talk about all sorts of stuff and things. We'd love to have you there. And if you like me enough, I would greatly appreciate it if you supported me on my Patreon, like these amazing folks here. But until next time, my friends, see ya!